Welcome to Impact Makers Radio, featuring industry thought leaders sharing problem-solving insights to help grow your business and live the life you love. And here's your host, Stewart Andrew Alexander.
Hi, and welcome to another Let's Talk Divorce conversation. And on this segment of the show, I have mediator and family law attorney Mark Baer of Mark B. Baer Inc., who is calling in all the way from Los Angeles. Now, Mark has a wealth of experience in the area of divorce mediation, and we'll be talking to you today about empathy and compassion with regard to divorce and family matters. Now, that sounds like a really interesting topic. Let's not keep Mark waiting any longer. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Stuart.
You are so welcome, Mark. So, can you briefly describe the kind of people you serve and the kinds of situations that they find themselves in, Mark, when they come to you for help?
Well, I serve people who are having problems with interpersonal relationships. A lot of that involves family law matters, so people who are going through divorce or a separation from a non-marital relationship, and maybe they have children together. But it also involves any number of situations with interpersonal conflicts and disputes.
Okay, so keeping in mind that anything you share with us today, Mark, is not legal advice or legal assistance, can you briefly share some of the most common misconceptions surrounding the topic of empathy and compassion with regard to divorce and family matters?
Well, when you think about it, most conflict in the world is the result of miscommunication, and by some estimates, as much as 90% of conflicts are the result of miscommunication. And if there's miscommunication, by definition, that means that there's problems with a lack of understanding. And empathy is a means of perspective taking. It's a concept, and it allows people to perspective take. And if you perspective take, you're curious, and through your curiosity and perspective taking, you learn information, and by learning information, you gain understanding. So if you have a conflict that is the result of a misunderstanding, and you delve into it out of curiosity to learn the information, you're going to find where the misunderstanding was. Maybe it's that you had different definitions of words. Maybe you had different expectations that were not stated. It could be any number of things. By the same token, there's been research by a world-renowned psychologist by the name of John Gottman, and he deals with family law relationships or marital relationships, and he's found that 31% of conflicts within a marriage are resolvable. And he also found that even though only 31% of conflicts in a marriage are resolvable, that you can still be involved in a happy and healthy marriage with 69% of the conflicts not being resolvable. So what that means is that if you have 31% that are resolvable, that means that you can learn to understand where the miscommunication lies, improve your communication style, and things of this nature. The non-resolvable things might be issues, for instance, differences in values and other such things. And that just because you have something that's non-resolvable doesn't mean that it can't be well managed. If you, through dialogue, and the ability to understand where people are coming from, why they believe the way that they do, why they feel the way that they do, you're able to accept people for who they are. And when you can accept people for who they are and you gain this understanding, you can develop also at the same time coping. And through coping, you cope to relate to these kind of people as opposed to having problems. So this would be acceptance of your spouse for who they are. This could be acceptance of anybody who is different from you, and we're all different to some degree, some more than others, and acceptance is important.
So with that said, based on what you did share with us, Mark, and obviously keeping client confidentiality in mind, can you share an example of how you've actually helped someone who came to you with those challenges that you've just described, and what kind of transformational results you were able to gain for them?
Oh my, there could be any number of situations. I mean, there can be, I've worked with, I can't even countless people who've had issues with regard to parenting of their kids. And, the reality is that just because you believe that what you're doing or what you believe is the best way to parent your kids doesn't mean that somebody else's parenting of their kids isn't equally good. That's just your opinion. And, the question then becomes, why do you believe the way that you believe? And, what facts, if any, are available that, if you were to learn of them, might cause you to reconsider your beliefs? Because the fact of the matter, for example, is that 80% of parents, from what I understand, spank their children. They somehow seem to believe that it's a good way of disciplining their kids. But there was a 50-year study that followed people who had been, that followed kids that were spanked and not spanked over a 50-year period of time. And it came out about a year or so ago. And there was absolutely nothing positive that came from spanking kids, but a lot of very negative things. And if people want to go and look at that and say, gosh, I was spanked and I turned out okay. Well, first of all, it depends on the frequency of the spanking. It depends on your resilience. It depends on a lot of, how the spanking was done. But the fact of the matter is, if we know there's no positive that comes from it, and we know that there's only potential for negative, why would you want to risk creating a negative for your kids if there's nothing positive that's going to come from it? So, the reality is, at what point are we interested in reconsidering our beliefs as a result of facts that come out or empirical research? Because I realize that we are apparently, according to some politicians, we're living in a post-fact world. But from my position, there's a huge difference between beliefs, faith, and facts, and empirical research. So, it's important for people to be willing to question why they believe what they believe. And if they're willing to do that, then, then they can learn things. They might learn that they could be wrong. And the fact of the matter is that if somebody is willing to admit that they made a mistake, as opposed to trying to rationalize things, as people are also good at doing, then you can improve.
This is a fascinating conversation, Mark. Let me ask you this question then, Mark. If somebody who's been thrust into divorce totally unexpected, let's say a scenario where their partner has cheated and they find themselves in that unfortunate situation, what you're saying on paper sounds fantastic. Have empathy and compassion with regard to divorce and family law matters. However, one is full of emotions, all kinds of different emotions: anger, disappointment, the values that were impeded on, as you mentioned before. What kind of coping mechanism can you share with the listener out there who may find themselves in that position right now where they're just so full of anger and disappointment, so that they can leave that at the door and walk in with empathy and with compassion? How do you drop all of that and get yourself in the right mindset?
Well, I don't know that we can tell people to drop their anger and emotions, and I think that our emotions are important. The fact of the matter is that it's a question of what we do with them. For example, this is off the topic of family law, but it's related. Roy Schneider it caused a lot of problems when he made a comment about Martin Luther King, or pertaining to Representative Lewis, Congressman Lewis, with regard to what Martin Luther King did and why he did it. And he was saying essentially, among other things, that Lewis is an angry man and that Martin Luther King wasn't. And that's not, in fact, true. Martin Luther King was angry. That's why he did the things he did. It's just a question of how he chose to deal with his anger and his emotions, and he chose to address them in a constructive way. And so to say that Martin Luther King wasn't angry, of course he was angry. He was fighting for civil rights for himself and other African Americans. If you don't think that he was angry because of the way that he and other African Americans were treated, then something's wrong with you. It's just how he chose to approach it. And anger is a secondary emotion anyway. So there might be sadness or something behind it, but it's a secondary emotion. And the fact of the matter is that if we're dealing with somebody who had an affair, the reality of the situation is we can look at it from our own perspective all we want and sit and wallow in the fact that we're a victim because our spouse cheated on us. But the reality of the situation is I have yet, in my 25 plus years of practicing law and my almost 52 years of living in this world, I have yet to see a situation in which an affair, for example, occurs out of nowhere, and it was not the result of a breakdown of a marriage of some sort. So the reality is that there's a turning of a marriage that occurs over a period of time, whatever it may be. If somebody's not, let's talk about empathy. That's the point of this session. So if a spouse is not meeting their spouse's needs and interests, what do you think the spouses whose needs and interests aren't being met is going to do? Now, I'm not suggesting, and I never would suggest, that having an affair is a good idea. It's not. But the reality is that it happens, and it happens because typically needs are not being met in the marriage. And maybe if you sat down and had a dialogue with your spouse, or were doing things to try and address each other's needs, somebody wouldn't be looking outside of the marriage. So, do we look at ourselves too and say, gosh, maybe I contributed to this? Now, maybe you didn't contribute to your spouse choosing to end the marriage by having an affair, which is a really awful way to end the marriage. But you most certainly did contribute to the marriage ending. That's just how your spouse chose to end it, and it wasn't a wise decision.
Thank you for your candid thoughts on that, Mark. It's a really interesting topic that you've brought to the airways today. So with that said, the topic is empathy and compassion with regard to divorce and family matters. And with that in mind, and Mark, and for those divorcing couples listening in right now, what are one or two of the most common but unknown pitfalls you'd like them to be aware of? You've kind of touched on some already, but if you could just expand on a few others, I think that would be great for the listeners to listen to.
The common pitfalls. Well, first of all, people who are married, not always, but typically have children together. And whether the children are minors or adults, the fact of the matter is that whether they like it or not, they're going to be tied together for life through their kids. And the reality of the situation is that if you have a choice, people always have a choice. And the choice that they have is, do I want to approach this situation in a combative manner? And or do I want to approach it in a problem-solving manner? That's the choice. Because the fact of the matter is that the way in which the legal system is designed, it's adversarial. Adversarial means each person is playing to win. So the fact of the matter is that if you're in a marriage, let's talk about why these marriages are even at divorce court. If you're in a marriage or a relationship, and it's more important to you to win your arguments than to have a dialogue and work through the issues and problem solve, then guess what? You've chosen winning over the relationship. Now let's look at the divorce situation. The court system is adversarial. It's about winning. It's not about right and wrong. It's not about truth and justice. If it were about truth and justice, then the reality is that there wouldn't be a person being released from prison after serving an average of 14 years in prison and later being found factually innocent, but having been convicted beyond a reasonable doubt of a crime they didn't commit, and then having prosecutors interviewed who were involved in putting them behind bars saying, I don't think they should be released because they lost the game. And by the way, our vice president did just that. Mike Pence wouldn't pardon somebody before he left the governorship because even though the person was found factually innocent, he lost the game. It is not about justice. It's not about truth. It's not about right and wrong. It's about winning. And winning is not about problem solving. Look at what happens in Congress. You think our government is working to solve problems, or are they playing win-lose games? So, the one thing is to focus on the reality of the situation here. Do you wish to problem solve, or do you wish to play a win-lose game? Because that's the choice. That's the choice you get to make. And litigation, it's not about solving problems. And nobody plays that game to lose. So both people are playing to win. And when you do that, you exacerbate conflicts, among other things. So that's one. Another one has to do with collaboration. Collaboration is to try and find out what vision or mission that you have in common. And that's a very high motivator for people to be able to work with each other. If you walk in and you have your own goals that you want to accomplish, and your spouse or your ex-significant other has their own goals they want to accomplish, that's not a very strong motivator for collaboration or cooperation. If you can delve deeper and try to find out where you have a common mission or vision or shared goals, now we're talking about something that is going to help you to be able to cooperate with each other, because a common vision is or mission one of those two, and the order that they go in depends upon who's doing the research. But mission and vision are the strongest motivators of cooperation. Family ties is the next strongest to my recollection. And then after that is shared goals or common goals. And then after that, we have our own, individual goals. So the reality is, if you're talking about parents who have kids together and they're going to be tied together for life, you don't think that they could figure out that they have a common mission and vision? You don't think that they can figure out that they have shared goals? They have to sit and play a my goal against your goal kind of situation? And if we again do perspective taking and through empathy delve into things and get a better understanding of each other's feelings and needs and things of this nature, now we can actually find that although you believe you have individual goals that might be different than your spouse's or your ex-spouse's or ex-significant others, now we might be able to find some commonality there.
Mark, can I find myself a wife and then just come up with any kind of reason for a divorce so that I can come and be one of your clients? No, seriously, this is so good. This is great information that you're sharing. And it is obvious that you're so passionate about what you do. And, for the people who are out there who are listening right now, the divorcing couples, I'm sure you've piqued their interest and they would love to know a little bit more about yourself. And especially in terms of your background and your education and experience as it relates to the topic of divorce and mediation. So if you could, in your own words, just share a little bit about your backstory, please, Mark.
Well, I was before I became a lawyer and while I was a older minor child, my parents had a very, very nasty divorce. And I didn't want to go into family law when I went into law, and it just happened that I fell into it at some point. But when I fell into it, I wasn't going to approach it in the traditional way because that was so harmful to me, my siblings, and my family. And, the reality that people also don't understand, and again, it has to do with perspective, is for the same reason. When I've gone to law school classes to lecture at mediation class for the law school, which I did again last night, actually, the students typically come up to me, several of them, and say, the last thing I would want to go into would be family law because of my experience with my parents' divorce. And so from a practical point of view, there aren't a lot of people in the field who were minor children or still financially dependent, maybe because they were in college and their parents were flipping the bill, but financially dependent or minor children of their parents when their parents went through a nasty divorce who go into family law. The people who go into family law, their parents might not be divorced. They might have been divorced when the kids are older and independent or other such things, but so there's this lack of perspective within the field of people who have been harmed as minor kids in a divorce. And therefore, there's this complete loss of compassion and understanding for the perspective of the kids, and there's no clue. And the lawyers look at things from the perspective that it's just par for the course. It's just the nature of the beast. Well, it's not. outcomes are typically determined by the way in which the game is designed. If you choose to design a game in an adversarial fashion where you're not trying to problem solve and you're not trying to de-escalate conflict and build or rebuild trust and other such things, then you're going to escalate the conflict. So this is not par for the course. It's a matter of approach. But my background, once I got into family law and moved my office to Pasadena, I got involved in the Psychological Association here as a member. Although I'm not a psychologist, they gave me a column to write in their newsletter, which I've been writing since September of 2008. I've had work published I do a lot of research and writing. Everything that I write and publish is considered psychologically minded. I now have a column in Psychology Today, even though I'm not a psychologist or mental health professional. So I'm very psychologically minded, and I think it's really important for people to understand that, contrary to popular belief, our decisions are emotionally based. That's why when we see commercials of a hamburger store, we see it with some woman, with a pretty woman with juice eating the burger and it's dripping down her face, or some hot person on a car. We're not buying the person, we're buying the burger or the car. That's an emotional thing. It's because the advertisers know that people make emotional decisions. That's how we make them. We can't make dispassionate decisions. That's not true. And when people believe that you can make a dispassionate decision, that's a false reality. And in fact, I remember when President Obama was saying before he got elected that the most important thing for a judge to have is empathy. And it created a big outcry from conservatives that empathy makes judges soft. Well, I've done an analysis of the cases in which you've heard of the case with, I imagine, with the Stanford swimmer who sexually assaulted one of the students on campus, and the judge put him in jail for 6 months, and then he got out on 3 months. Well, decisions like that are not uncommon, and there's an outcry all the time when they occur. But the fact of the matter is that if you understand empathy, that's an empathy problem. That's an empathy problem on the part of the judge, because the judge has empathy, but their empathy is not evenly distributed. In those instances, their empathy is toward the person who is being prosecuted and not toward the victims and survivors. And if you don't have evenly distributed empathy, then I'm afraid that you're extraordinarily biased. If you don't have evenly distributed empathy, then justice and fairness can't occur. If you don't have evenly distributed empathy, then you're not considering certain perspectives. And the fact of the matter is that without considering all information, critical thinking is impaired. So the decisions by these judges to let people off lightly, let me be real clear. If you had had a judge with evenly distributed empathy on those cases, the punishment would have been much more suitable for the offense. And when you have situations in which a punishment is too harsh for the offense, that again is an empathy problem. That is because there was too little empathy toward the person who was being punished, for example. So and too much for the other side again. So the reality is that if you have unevenly distributed empathy, then there's going to be a problem. And I don't want to compare judges by any means to terrorists, but there has been study after study to find that terrorists have higher levels of average levels of empathy than the general public. However, their empathy is limited to people similar to themselves. So when you do not have evenly distributed empathy, the more unevenly distributed that it is, the more problems occur.
Mark, you shared some really fantastic analogies today that is certainly going to give the listener out there something to think about, something to ponder on, something to discuss in their own circle of influence. But unfortunately, we are running out of time, Mark. So with that said, I'd just like you to picture the kinds of people who come to you for help and they want to know more about empathy and compassion with regard to divorce and family law matters. So what kind of final thoughts would you like to leave those people who are listening in right now?
Well, I have a column on Psychology Today that they gave me back in November, and the column is titled Empathy in Relationships, Fostering Genuine Open-Mindedness. So, some of this information can be gleaned by reading these articles, but even before I was given that column, empathy is a common theme throughout my writings. And in fact, they have a Law and Compassion Institute in the United Kingdom, and they put on symposiums. And they're putting on a symposium in July in the United Kingdom pertaining to family law and children, and it's from Law and Compassion. And everybody involved in that symposium is in the United Kingdom, except for one person. That's me. They found me because of my work in this field, and they've asked me to participate in that program in July.
I'm really glad that you found the time to come on to the show today, Mark. So if there is somebody out there who wants to know more about being empathetic and compassionate within the process of divorce and family law matters, how would they be able to connect with you? Where would they find you, Mark?
Well, my website is www.markbaeresq.com. That's markbaeresq.com. And they can certainly send me a communication through the website.
Okay, so whether you're cruising down the highway, you're tuning in from home, or listening in on your personal device, that's all we have time for today, unfortunately. That was Mark Baer. Thank you for sharing so generously with us today, Mark. You have certainly demonstrated that you're a true educator and advocate for your client's success. So thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you so much for having me on your program, Stewart.
Thank you. You're welcome as well, Mark. And I'd also like to say a big thank you to you, the listener, for joining in on this very insightful and informative conversation with one of the top mediators and family law attorneys in Los Angeles today. Make sure you check him out, give him a call, visit his website. You'll certainly be in good hands. So again, I'm Stewart Andrew Alexander. We'll be back again shortly with some more leading divorce professionals in this, our series of Let's Talk Divorce. So until then, take care, have a great day, and we'll talk real soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Impact Makers Radio. To listen to all past, present and future industry thought leaders and trendsetters, visit us at impactmakersradio.com.